Okay, so with us this afternoon is Eli Enns, and he's from the IISAAK OLAM Foundation. He's the co-founder and CEO. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon, and take it away.
Beauty. Thank you. Yeah. Is my volume coming through okay there, the audio? I don't know whose note these are, but it says chocolate. That's like the punchline. Nice. Yeah, my name's Eli Enns. I'm on my father's side of my family. We're Clayoquot from the west coast of Vancouver Island here. Sometimes I forget what city I'm in, but we're in Victoria, right? Yes. Okay, good. I was born here in Victoria back in 1980, and my dad's side's from the west coast of Vancouver Island. My mother was born in St. Boniface, Winnipeg, Manitoba. So I come, hey, yeah, right on. Yeah, I heard someone talking about the University of Winnipeg earlier. Anyhow, yeah, so on my mom's side of my family, we're, is the volume not working through there? Okay. I could stand closer.
No, we got talking.
Okay. Just keep talking. Yeah, I can manage that. So yeah, anyways, on my on my mom's side of my family, we're Dutch Mennonite immigrants, originally from the Netherlands, but we got pushed around Europe to Ukraine, down to Mexico, and up from Mexico to Canada in 1930. My late grandfather, Peter Enns, immigrated to Canada in 1930. And so on that side of my family, you know, we're farmers. On my dad's side, we're Nuu-chah-nulth. The Nuu-chah-nulth peoples on the west coast of Vancouver Island are whale hunting peoples. We haven't done a whale hunt since 1909. 1914 kind of a deal, and yeah, very coastal, ocean dependent peoples. The interesting common denominator in my experience has been that on both sides of my family, very much community minded people. So the Mennonites, very community minded, putting the collective well-being ahead of individual well-being and profit. And same thing with on the Nuu-chah-nulth side. And I think that's kind of a Canadian quality, maybe. Let's see. So by show of hands, who here considers themselves to be a Canadian? Put up your hand if you think you're a Canadian. Okay. Oh, I don't know. You're American? United Statesian? Okay, good to know. Okay, now what is the word, by show of hands, what does the word Canada mean? Does anyone know what the word Canada means? A filmmaker does. Village, all right, cool. Does anyone know whose language that is? The word Canada, whose language is that? Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee, this guy's a smart filmmaker. So, you know, I don't like to glorify war, but, you know, I think it's worth mentioning, particularly nowadays and what's going on geopolitically, is that the Haudenosaunee Confederation allied with King George III in the United Kingdom during the 7 Years' War, which took place during the 1750s. And the outcome of that, well, first of all, they defeated the French in that war, and King George issued his Royal Proclamation of 1763. Now, I'm not just recounting history here for the sake of recounting history. This is consequential in Canadian constitutional law and what makes Canada what it is today, as defined and distinct from the United States of America and from the United Kingdom and from France. So, yeah, the Haudenosaunee Confederation was organized based on the Great Law of Peace. So the founding fathers of the United States of America they admired the Haudenosaunee. And by the way, at that time, you know, if you can kind of think about it, there was no text messaging, emails, there was no telephones, whatnot. And so everything was done in the kind of like the old-fashioned way. And so the Haudenosaunee provided an advantage in war because they knew the land intimately. The the people of the Haudenosaunee, the warriors that went and allied with King George, they knew the land very well, and that was a strategic advantage on the battlefield. And furthermore, the Haudenosaunee warrior had progressed through various ceremonial rites of passage, so to speak. And what that did was the Haudenosaunee warrior did not fear death, but not in the macho way that we might think about it. More accurately, the Haudenosaunee warrior was at peace with their own mortality. So understanding that all things that live will eventually die, and in that peacefulness with life and death was a lack of fear on the battlefield, and so they were able to move more eloquently on the battlefield, and this gave them another advantage. And so the Haudenosaunee allied with King George III during the 7 Years' War, and were successful in defeating the French and their allied nations. By the way, there was other Indigenous nations that allied with the French during that war. And so King George was so satisfied, so grateful for this relationship, he issued his Royal Proclamation of 1763. So when you look back in the evolution of constitutional law in Canada, we're dramatically different from the United States in terms of in the United States of America, they separated violently from the United Kingdom in the American Revolutionary War in 1776. They created a constitution, which I guess is now toilet paper in Mar-a-Lago. I don't know. But in Canada, we did not have such a concise separation. The umbilical cord continued on until 1982. So you start off with these imperial statutes, the Proclamation of 1763, various Supreme Court Canada decisions. People think about the British North American Act of 1867, but the Canada Act of 1982 is when Canada actually separated formally by creating a domestic amending formula for our own constitution here in Canada, separate from the Privy Council in London, in the UK. And so the Royal Proclamation of 1763 was a unilateral message as an expression of chivalry and an extension of chivalry to the Haudenosaunee Confederation. And, like I said earlier, there was no emails and whatnot. So literally there were scribes that wrote out the proclamation and then brought that to the various allied nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederation in the aftermath of the 7 Years' War, which, by the way, was considered to be a global war because it took place in more than one continent simultaneously. And so now you had to wait for the thaw of the snow. Don knows about snow out in eastern Canada there with the 3 storms that just came through. And so when people were able to travel again in the spring and early summer, there was a gathering at a place called Fort Niagara in southern Ontario. And the Proclamation of 1763 was received in ceremony in the Treaty of Fort Niagara, which was commemorated in something they call a wampum belt. And a wampum belt is essentially a memory device that can be used to record information about historical events and what was agreed upon during those events. And so this... The thing here about the wampum belt is a symbolic memory device that is based in simple but powerful teachings. And so the center row of the wampum represented a river. And in the river were 2 vessels, 2 watercraft. And one of them was a boat that represented King George and his people, his legal traditions and culture and language and religion and whatnot. And the other boat represented the Haudenosaunee and the indigenous nations of Kanata. And so the simple but powerful message behind this two-row wampum belt was that we now have a shared destiny. Forever, like this river of our shared destiny, we will always travel on forever after. Our destinies are inextricably linked now. I won't try to steer your boat if you don't try to steer my canoe. And this is the simple but powerful principle and premise of Kanata, which is parallel sovereignty and peaceful coexistence. So you might have heard about the peace and friendship treaties. In modern day international politics, a good way of interpreting the peace and friendship treaty is that it's number one, it's a multilateral environmental agreement. So many parties that all have their own sovereignty that are entering into an agreement. And that agreement was anchored in natural law. As long as the grass grows, the river flows, and the sun shines, we'll live in peace and friendship. Parallel sovereignty and peaceful coexistence. And there's terms that can help us to interpret that in modern international geopolitics, is the difference between negative peace and positive peace. So negative peace is simply the absence of war and open conflict. So basically, we're not going to try and kill each other. Positive peace is the absence of war and conflict and the presence of justice and good relations. And so what the Haudenosaunee had figured out, which the founding fathers of the United States of America emulated in the District of Columbia in Washington there, was this idea of collective security. In other words, if we have, say, for example, a confederation of 10 tribes, if any one of those tribes are attacked, it is considered that all are attacked. So this is collective security. And the founding fathers of the United States of America emulated that. In fact, they were great admirers of the Haudenosaunee because of the sophistication, the simple but powerful geopolitical, let's say, diplomacy of the great law of peace. The part that I think they missed a little bit, and we're maybe seeing that a little bit more today, in addition to collective security, there was a commitment during times of peace to foster bioregional economics and what I call peaceful commerce. And this is when you have buildup of surplus goods, depending on your proximity to the equator. So, depending on where you are on the land in relation to the equator, you experience the seasons differently, and you may experience surplus goods at different times of the year. Then your neighbor might go without, and I have surplus goods. Well, we're not at war with each other, so let's get together ceremoniously, and I'll give you my surplus goods, and then likewise. And this is during times of peace, how we fortify good relations such that when bad times come about, potentially war, that we can call upon one another in our mutual defense in collective security. And that's what Canada was founded upon. Canada was founded upon these simple but powerful multilateral international agreements that we refer to kind of collectively as peace and friendship treaties. When, just stepping back a minute, there is a prerequisite. A prerequisite to having legitimate authority to enter into international peace and friendship treaties is that we have to maintain good relations with what you could consider to be the primary treaty with Creator Mother Nature, let's say. I don't know if you're religious or what your spirituality is. I'm not trying to do a sermon here, but I use the terminology Creator Mother Nature to represent that great provision of life and abundance from the natural world. And there's ongoing suffering that's happening, and environmental impact that's happening because of the so-called atmospheric rivers in 2021. But if you go back 100 years, so when I talk about the floods in Abbotsford, do people know what I'm talking about? Okay. So 100 years ago, that whole area that was flooded out, that was a shallow lake, and it was a sturgeon lake. So there was a fishery there, an abundant sturgeon fishery. Have you ever seen a sturgeon fish? These are ancient-looking creatures. They get to be like 100 years old. They look like a dinosaur or something. And these guys really flourished in this shallow lake in what today we call Abbotsford. And this lake was kind of a fail-safe for stormwater management, let's say. So in the summer months when it was dry, the lake would contract and become smaller, exposing the lake bed. And in the winter months, the lake would expand, and it was a shallow, bigger lake. And so the Sumas Nation utilized the sturgeon fishery since time immemorial, and they were quite prosperous, and the sturgeon fishery provided a healthy source of protein and a reliable source of protein at that. But when the newcomers came, and a lot of them were Mennonites, farming people, when they came and the lake, contracted during the summer months, they found that the lake bed soil conditions were very nutrient rich and quite good for agriculture. And so what they did, against the advice of the elders, the elders who were alive at the time of the Sumas Nation, they advised the newcomers not to farm in there, basically. And they built houses in there. They built up fuel storage facilities and other feed storage facilities, and they used technology to keep that lake drained so that they could farm in there. And the elders said, eventually that lake's going to reestablish itself. And so what you're doing is you might prosper today temporarily, but you're committing your children and your grandchildren to hardship by violating that natural law. And so it was a double hit on the Sumas people because they lost their sturgeon fishery, a reliable, healthy source of protein, and also now the build-up of the newcomers and further displacement of the Sumas civilization. Fast forward 100 years later, now the lake reestablishes itself. And the unfortunate narrative that won the day was that it was the fault of climate change, And in my view, that's scapegoating, and it borders beyond oversimplification to actually misinformation, in my view. It's not just climate change. We fundamentally undermined the ecosystem's ability to deal with stormwater, big deluge that normally would happen. And so this is what I'm trying to get at when I'm talking about the primary treaty with Creator, is that we have to treat that which has been provided with respect. And when they artificially drained that lake continuously year after year over decades, they violated natural law. And when you violate natural law, and the primary treaty with Creator, Mother Nature, is that there's no easy way out. You can't pay a fine or serve a jail sentence. The consequences are felt in natural law, and it's generally felt by your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren. So the people who made that decision to drain that lake artificially, they may have had many sunny days of good times with their agriculture, but now their grandchildren are suffering, and the land is suffering as well. not to be melodramatic or anything, but anyways, so my point here is that the primary treaty, we have to walk in the world with a grateful heart. Even on the darkest day of your life, there's something to be thankful for. To treat that which has been provided with respect, and wherever possible and wherever appropriate, to be generous with others. And that third thing is the premise of international peace and friendship treaties that folks like the Haudenosaunee Confederation were able to enter into legitimate international agreements with King George III at Fort Niagara in 1764. Okay, so 1764. 12 years later, the American Revolutionary War. And up until that point, there was this hypnosis that God and Crown were totally united. That, this whole notion of God bless him, God save the Queen, or God save the King, that church and Crown were completely united and reinforced one another. And so when the United States of America separated violently from their own father, they broke that hypnosis and they said, well, God no longer favors the Crown, God bless America, right? And this was what born American exceptionalism and what they call manifest destiny, which is still, people like Donald Trump still remember, I mean, sometimes he seems like a lunatic, but those things were set into course a long time ago. And they sought to stamp out all loyalists. After the American Revolutionary War, the loyalists to King George fled north. And they settled in northeastern states, in Ontario, and a diaspora of British across what we call today Canada, the Dominion of Canada. And it was cold. There was 3 feet of snow, and everyone, the misconception among a lot of Americans was that we all lived in igloos up here. And so the British North Americans were able to kind of get away to the north and recede into their peace and friendship treaty with the Haudenosaunee Confederation. So 1776. Now fast forward to 1812, and the United States of America never rested. They were always pushing north and west. The Russians were in what we call today Alaska, Russian North America. They were pushing southeast, and the United States was pushing northwest. And so what British North America was trying to accomplish was to create a standalone dominion and stave off American expansionism. And that one of the growing pains in that relationship was the War of 1812. Between 1812 and 1815, the United States of America sought to stamp out all loyalists to King George. And they were not successful. And at the time, the British were, the United Kingdom was at war once again with the French. And they were distracted from their North American ventures, just protecting the homelands back in Europe. And so what King George and what the British did once again was activate their peace and friendship treaty with the Haudenosaunee Confederation, who sent warriors from across North America to defend Canadian borders at that time. Which, if you look back at the history record, it was decisive particularly in the early months of the war, where the British were so distracted with their conflict with the French, again back in Europe. And so, on the National Film Board of Canada, I don't mean to put you to sleep there, sir, but on the National Film Board of Canada, there's a documentary that was created by a woman named Loretta Todd, and it's called Forgotten Warriors. And I highly encourage, every time Remembrance Day comes around, I get hot under the collar because somebody in their, for whatever reason, they created a separate Remembrance Day for Indigenous peoples. But to me, that's an insult, not to be too sensitive about the matter, but my family, we defended Canadian borders for 20 years between 1792 and 1811. The 2 decades leading up to the War of 1812, we staved off American expansionism by taking the Boston and the Tonquin to American ships off the west coast of Vancouver Island here. And again, I don't wish to glorify war, but my grandfather's brother went to World War II at the age of 16 years old voluntarily. He lied to the Canadian Army, and he went over there and he came back alive, and he successfully helped in the defense of this country. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in Hawaii, our people brought out regalia, and we fortified the west coast with anti-landing craft embattlements and gunneries and bomb bunkers and a big airport out at Long Beach to defend Canada from possible land and sea invasion by the Japanese during World War II. And so, whenever Remembrance Day comes around, I get a little chagrined because the word Canada itself is a Haudenosaunee word, and we've been defending this country for so long. Anyhow, getting to the point of the matter here, in 1984, there was, backing up a minute, between 1909 and 1984 was basically a large-scale liquidation of natural resources that was not in the best interests of Canadians. I can say that with some certainty. And 97% of this island was clear-cut logged. And who benefited from that? We could have had a logging industry that lasted generations if we had just been a little more careful and smart about how we developed those resources. Our people always used cedar resources, by the way. We used it for our housing, for our clothing, for our transportation, top to bottom. Our whole society was founded upon foresting cedar trees. But when you clear cut them and then just send it off to some foreign, value-added facilities, and all those jobs get exported, then something's wrong. So in 1984, when we went, my uncle Moses Martin was our chief counselor at the time, and he stood on the shores of Heelboom Bay, where Macmillan Bloedel was planning to land and offload road building equipment on Mears Island. It was one of the last frontiers of old growth. And it wasn't just Indigenous peoples standing on those blockades, there was non-Indigenous peoples. And when it came to October 20th, 1984, not far from here at Parliament, the Legislative Assembly building here, it was not just Indigenous peoples standing and protesting the tomfoolery of the liquidation of old growth cedar resources, but also there were labor unions there. And there was Christian organizations there. There was hippies. Everybody knows the hippies stood alongside there. My mother was one of them from the prairies. But what a lot of people are surprised to learn is that the common man, like the common worker, also saw this. They saw it. Lee Hilbert was the guy who brought the logging plants to my Uncle Moses. He was a non-Indigenous employee of Macmillan Bloedel. And he saw the tomfoolery of the industrial logging industry and how it wasn't, not only was it bad for nature, it was bad for Indigenous peoples, but it was bad for the common guy who wanted a 9-to-5 job to provide for himself and for his family, herself and her family. And so there was a great moment of solidarity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in 1984 to combat the self-destructive liquidation of natural resources on Vancouver Island. Now, I was 4 years old in 1984, so I don't have a lot of recollections of that time. But in my own time, in 2009, I attended a gathering at the Legislative Assembly building here in Victoria, and once again we stood with labor unions. And the whole hashtag of that gathering, it was a very large gathering, well attended by Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And the hashtag of that was protecting ancient forests and protecting jobs. Same thing happened out on the East Coast with the collapse of the cod industry. Government laid bare and exposed the people, the common people, to poor decision making regarding the cod fishery, and that could have been a staple of jobs and food security for Canadians, but through, I don't know, maybe once you get elected into federal office, an alien comes along and puts a chip in your head or something, I don't know. But somehow we lose track. We lose touch with what's in the best interest of your constituents. We lose track of that. And so when I say Regina Manifesto, does that mean anything to people here? He knows about the Regina Manifesto. This was, God-fearing, salt of the earth, blue-collar people, the early immigrants to Canada, who had communal values, and respected nature, that came together and say, we need to take heedance of what happened with the Great Depression and the weaponry of economy in capitalism, and this was the birth of social democracy and the idea of unifying as people, and healthcare and like universal healthcare and all these things that we point to. What makes Canada different from the United States of America, and what do we commonly hold as values? And looking after your neighbor and making the world a better place for your children and your grandchildren. What kind of legacy are you going to leave for them? And so the legacy of solidarity, I think now, and by the way, I mean, like I've been really upfront in my conversation with you today. One half of my ancestry is immigrant, and then my other half's been here since time immemorial. Now we have other newcomers coming, and what you have now, maybe I'm going to open up a can of worms here, but I have one of my mentors is a woman named Emily Chu, and she is 100% Chinese in her lineage, but she was born and raised in Calcutta, India. And she speaks like 5 languages, and she can read and write in Sanskrit. She's a really very intelligent individual. Anyways, and she explained to me that she has 3 generations of her family that are 100% Chinese descent, that born and raised in Calcutta, India. And what she explained was that what the British did is they would bring Indians from their Indian colonies to China, to their Chinese colonies, because there wasn't enough British to control all of their colonies. So they had to use people from their various places. So they brought the Indians from India to China to become part of the upper middle class. So you have a core British elite, and then you have an upper middle class made up of a foreign diaspora, right, like the Indians. And they would control, and there was very strict guidelines about intermarrying, or rather not intermarrying, with the Chinese, with the Indians there. And then they did the same thing. They brought Indians from India to China to become part of the upper middle class with a core British elite to control the domestic populations there. And so, there's probably a variety of entry points for racial injustice and discrimination and whatnot, but this is one of the strategies, and that continues to be used today. I'll leave it there. Those kinds of strategies are still being used. And so I think that regardless of that, and I'm all about bringing Syrian refugees here, by the way. But you know what? If we hadn't bombed their place in the first place, they'd still have a home. anyways, I don't want my taxpayer dollars to go to bombing those places. Anyways, I'm not trying to start a revolution here. I'm just airing some things out with you. And you know, like Canada, not long ago, Canada was overwhelmingly abundant with natural resources. On the prairies, the migration of the geese, and you know, it's only one generation ago, they remember, when the geese migrate, it blackened the sky from horizon to horizon, and the sound of the geese was deafening. The migratory of the, what do you call it, the bison was like thunder on the prairies. And on the west coast here, my Uncle Joe talks about how you could walk across the river on the back of the salmon because they were just so abundant, and how quickly we've eliminated and what do you call, like, destroyed that natural capital. But not all is lost. There is still an opportunity for us, I think, as Canadians. We saw it during the pandemic, how quickly Mother Nature started to rebound, and abundance once again was coming back. And so I think through the pandemic also was an opportunity for us to have a frank conversation about the difference between essential economics and what you could call frivolous economics, and also domestic supply chain security. And back then it was primarily around personal protective equipment, but look again at the droughts in what do you call, California back in 2014. They were en masse slaughtering cattle because they couldn't afford to hay their animals. If you don't have water, you can't grow hay. If it's too expensive to import hay to hay your animals, the humane thing to do is just to outright slaughter the animals, and that's what was happening. And so we should, I believe, one of the catch-alls in the British North American Act of 1867 is good governance. And the federal government has a responsibility to safeguard our domestic populations for not only food security, energy security, water security, but also economic security, and ensuring that we have jobs here for Canadians. And so that's the point I think I would end on here. I know that you want to get back on your agenda at 3:15. You have something else, but I'll say this. Any questions or thoughts? Have I confused or enraged anyone? Is anyone curious? I can keep talking, but if you have questions and comments, I want to hear them.
Any questions for Eli?
Stunned silence. A comment, sweet.
Or comment?
Yeah.
I don't know why there's silence on this. Good job. Kudos for bringing up some of the things that, you know, some Indigenous people don't want to bring up. So I think that was really great. Thank you for bringing this in. I just kind of want to know, like, for the title you have here on the legacy of solidarity between Indigenous peoples and labor unions.
Yeah.
I felt like you were going somewhere with this at one point when you were going to make this comment.
I got lost. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, basically the thing is like, if we just, tomfoolery and like, irresponsible economics, like, you know, if we just liquidate our resources, and, you know, the Klein government was a good example of this, Ralph Klein. When I say that word, that name, do people know what I'm talking about? Okay, then, you know, the Alberta Heritage Fund was very well, very well conceived, and it had the best of intentions to be a lasting legacy for not only Albertans but Canadians at large. And unfortunately, under bad governance, the Heritage Fund was essentially drained out. Bear in mind, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund emulated the Alberta Heritage Fund, but the Norwegians actually were consistent in implementing that fund. So you know, like, so the point here with my title, and by the way, that was Isabel. She chose those words, but that's the sentiment. I still stand by the sentiment of this, is that when we expose ourselves to predatory economic practices, It's bad for the environment, it's bad for Indigenous peoples, and it's bad for the average Canadian. And when I say the average Canadian, I'm talking about labor unions, people that represented the average Joe and Jane, to ensure equitable access to employment opportunity, and of course, if you're in it for the long run, if you're not just there to opportunistically profit as much as possible, as quickly as possible, if you're in it for the long run, we'll make better decisions. It's called living with the consequences of your decisions. And so the common people, I'm not talking about the hoity-toity, affluent 1% of people. I'm talking about the rest of us. We have more in common than we have in difference in that regard. And I believe, particularly now, the pandemic was getting things started, but now with Trump's hostile posturing and his tariffs, I think now we have an even bigger opportunity to come together, to be united, and to make good decisions, sound decisions for our children and our grandchildren. I have 3 grandchildren myself, so I have skin in the game, so to speak. And I'll also say this, just to be thorough. I don't think we should retaliate with tariffs. I think we need to be the bigger person. And I think that we need to turn the other cheek in this regard, because Trump's going to inflict pain on his own people. And if we retaliate, he's going to scapegoat us for that. Now, and then with domestic population under pressure, they're going to listen to whatever he says. So if he says, it's the Canadians' fault that you're experiencing all this pain, they don't even understand how tariffs work. It's going to increase the cost of living for the average American citizen. And I believe instead of retaliating in kind with tariffs, we should prepare humanitarian aid to go and help those people out. And I think the tide will go the other direction. Instead of us becoming the 51st state, I think there'll be states that want to join Canada. Yeah. Anyways, good crowd.
Any other questions for Eli?
What a wonderful outlook on life.
Oh, thank you.
Seeing no other questions?
Yeah, and we're getting down to your
Sorry,
back on
Gary,
the
go ahead.
A quick comment, Eli. That was a great presentation. I did a lot of negotiations with the pulp and paper industry over the years, and it was very difficult to get the companies to understand the relationship between us, the workers, First Nations, our resources, and everything.
Yeah.
And getting them to respect First Nations and what they did. We were bargaining in the middle of getting close to Remembrance Day, and the company was digging its heels in around September 29th, the recognition of the First Nations. So I did a lot of research around First Nations involvement in the wars, and there were some First Nations in the interior of British Columbia. 100% of the men in those nations volunteered.
Yeah.
It was not their war.
No. Yeah.
But they stood up for Canada. Like when you talked about the treaties there.
Yeah.
It was very, very emotional to me to see how interconnected that we were and how that we need to be to move forward.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. 100%. Yeah. And again, I don't like to glorify war, but when push comes to shove, and our native lands are threatened, and our children and our grandchildren are under threat, then you need to step forward. And it's not just in war; it's in building a better economy for something that's going to have resilience and wherewithal into the future. And we're smart people, so I think we can do it. And come together around our shared values. We have more in common than we have in difference. So my whole motto is, let's find our common ground, let's build on our common ground, and celebrate our differences. So with that, I'll walk out the door. Thank you for your kind attention, and thank you for the work that you guys are doing. It's great that you're associating with one another, and have yourself a great weekend.
a little something
really?
for yourself.
Okay, sweet.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks a
Appreciate
lot.
everything you said.
Right
today.
on. Thank you so much. All right. Enjoy.